So hello everyone, and welcome to our fifth masterclass, coming to you live from the Catholic University here in Leuven. We have a full and rich program prepared for you today. So for all of you just joining us at this time, I'd like to remind you of our norms for this masterclass. You are all very, very welcome to join, and if you know of anyone else who's trying to join at this moment but somehow doesn't have the link, you're more than welcome to share the link with them and they can join masterclass at any time. It is being recorded already, and so your camera on indicates your consent to have your image recorded. If you don't wish for that, you can simply turn your camera off. Please continue to leave your microphone on mute during the masterclass. However, you can at any time enter questions or remarks in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat on this end. If something can be responded to quickly, we'll do that. If it's a question to bring forward to the presenters during the discussion, we'll do that as well. So feel free to enter comments, questions in the chat at any time. So today's masterclass has four main parts to it. First, we'll give you an overview, a first exploration of the 6 tendencies that we see in the meta-analysis of the data. Secondly, we'll dive deep into the empirical analysis of those data with a thorough interpretation. Third, we'll present a series of conclusions and recommendations for critical action regarding Catholic identity, synthesizing our findings in this new meta-analysis. And lastly, we'll leave some time for questions and discussions, which you can enter into the chat at any time. So with that in mind, let me welcome Professor Didier Pollefeyt, Jan Bouwens, and give it over to Jan.
Good morning, good afternoon, Australia. It's great to see you all again. My name is Jan Bouwens. I'd like to explain the origins of the 6 tendencies, trying to explain a paradox that we saw in the Australian data. So here on the screen, you see some PCB scale results from the whole of Australia, with literal belief coming up in the past 10 years. And at the same time, we see it side by side with relativism, with an awareness of contingency. The research question this all began with was how to explain this. When literal belief increases, sometimes relativism holds its ground, or sometimes even increasing simultaneously. After all, conceptually, we would expect that these belief styles are opposite, are inversely correlated. They are diagonally on the 2-axis system. You can see that again here on the traffic light graphs. I encircled the literal belief agreement in green, and we see this go hand in hand with a big contingent of relativism. Surely there are literal believers who resist relativism. Surely there are relativists who despise literal belief. But there are also some literal believers who also agree at the same time with this relativism. You can see here the scatter plots with literal belief on the x-axis and relativism on the y-axis. And I indicated the upper right quadrant. The dots are people in the system. Overall, the correlation is negative. The blue trend line is going down. But there are quite a number of people among staff, leadership, and also students who find themselves in the combination of relativism and literal belief. So for some subgroups, this goes hand in hand. Can we isolate the people in the top right corner, understand this pattern and describe it? So to do that, I tried to eliminate the subgroups that did not exhibit this correlation, leaving only the subgroup that does, and we'll call that tendency 4 in a minute. So we can isolate it and we can study it separately. And in the end of the exercise, I ended up with 6 subgroups that we found to exist in the Australian data. to which the vast majority of respondents belong. There are 6 tendencies, 6 patterns of intelligible combinations of belief styles and school types that provide a deeper insight into the ECSI survey data from Australia. Let's now have a closer look at the 6 tendencies. Okay.
So, good morning from the heart of Europe. Welcome again in Leuven. Today, indeed, we present brand new insights, some new discoveries that we did, looking to sub-tendencies in the Australian population, Catholic schools, 280 schools altogether. And we put them here on the PCB diagram. And for the first time, I will show them to you and the names, the nicknames we gave to these 6 tendencies. The first one are people that are post-critical believers. The second tendency we call people with a guarded openness. We'll explain later what that means. In third place, we have the really literal believers. Then we have a fourth brand new tendency we like to discuss with you today, and we call them, after a lot of discussion, the tolerant, convinced people. Tolerant, convinced. The fifth tendency is called the mild relativists, and the second and sixth tendency, crossing external critique and relativism, we have called the secularists. In a moment, we go deeper in each of these 6 new patterns.
So, you are familiar with these patterns already, I'm sure. Here are some concrete examples of where you might find how you can recognize people that exhibit these trends. So imagine different approaches to school prayer. A post-critical believer, at the bottom left, prays attentively, wrestles with the language, notices differences among the participants, and suggests interfaith adaptation. The charismatic dialogue people, they pray devoutly, they appreciate the Catholic ritual, and they warmly welcome all present. Come and see. Our prayer will draw you in the insider's perspective of the Catholic faith. The little believing people kneel properly, they recite with conviction, and then report students who didn't participate. The tolerant convinced identify with Catholic practice strongly, they recite on automatic pilot, and tolerate those who don't. The mild relativists appreciate ritual aesthetically, and then internally compare it to Buddhist chanting. And the secularists stand silently with their arms crossed, visibly uncomfortable with this superstition they are confronted with. Just another example, to Advent or Christmas season preparations, how would these 6 trends respond differently? And if you think of the people in your schools, students, staff, you might recognize some of these attitudes. Post-critical believers reflect on incarnation theology, the significance of Christ in different contexts, and they look for ways to include other believers. Guarded openness is excited to share Catholic traditions with non-Catholic peers, but is not too interested in their own point of view, though. Literal believers insist on Merry Christmas and not Happy Holidays. It's a Catholic school after all. Tolerant convinced people strictly observe Advent rules, look forward to Christmas Mass, but don't think deeply about its meaning. Mild relativists enjoy festive Christmas atmosphere and appreciate winter solstice traditions across cultures. And the secular people tolerate the Christmas period as a cultural celebration, but prefers to skip the religious elements. A third and final example, imagine there is a new student in your school wearing a jihab, a headscarf, in a Catholic school. The post-critical believer will say, welcome, very interested to learn about Ramadan in comparison to Lent. And he asks thoughtful questions. Guarded openness people are friendly. They hope that the witness of Catholic joy attracts also Muslim children. Literal believers are polite but uncomfortable, wonders why she's at a Catholic school. Tolerant, convinced people don't think too much about it. Many of their neighbors are Muslim and Buddhist and Hindu anyway. Little to do with me. It won't affect the truth of my religion. and treats her like everyone else. Mild relativists are fascinated by comparative religion, and they ask about Islamic practices. We share the same God after all. And the secularists they consider both religious symbols, both the jihad and the crucifix, as equally problematic. It'd be better to be dressed in a neutral way, they think with themselves. So 6 tendencies you might recognize in your own context. Here they are again on the screen, overlaid on the PCB scale diagram. Now in the next step, we will go deeper into each of the 6 tendencies. But first I give the words back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you, Professor Pollefeyt. Just a quick word of welcome to all of the people who are just joining us now in the last few minutes. You are welcome indeed. Just as a bit of norming, I remind everyone to please keep your microphone on mute because this masterclass is being recorded. If you have your camera on, it indicates your consent to have your image included in the recording. Otherwise, please turn your camera off. And a reminder to all that you're more than welcome to enter remarks and questions in the chat at any time. We are monitoring that and will answer either in the chat or bring them forward to give them to the presenters.
Thank you, Michael. So let's take a deep dive in the 6 tendencies based on data that we have collected in Australia. We'll start with a description of the Australian sample. We'll show you graph results, a theoretical overview, and we will have concrete examples. We will evaluate each tendency and provide recommendations per tendency. First, we're looking at data. We're always data-driven. Australian sample from 23 and 24. With Australian, I mean a combination of data from Victoria, Queensland, Parramatta, and Adelaide. So all the data we have collected in that time period across no less than 280 schools, 3 Catholic education offices, 45,803 respondents. The 3 Catholic education officers present in the datasets are the office from Parramatta, the office from Townsville participated in that period, and also a number of people from the office in Ballarat in Victoria. So a good data set, we see students, teachers, school leadership, parents, and Catholic education office members. So when we show you data, this will be their origin. Let's dive into the first tendency called post-critical belief, more or less the ideal ECSI normative perspective.
Okay. From a theoretical point of view, of course, you know this position, but it's a quite pure form of it. It's our people with a mature post-critical faith that combine theological depth, hermeneutical engagement, and at the same time, openness to dialogue. You see, they are on the yellow number 1. It are people who have left behind literal belief, came to an interpretive faith through formation, life experiences, and reflection. It is found often, mostly among Catholic educators or e-teachers and leaders, and occasionally, sometimes we also see it with students that have moved beyond literal belief, even if that is very difficult for young people to do in Australia. So these people have an authentic Catholic spirituality, but it's combined with humility. So they recognize also fragility, negative theology in their religious attitudes, and they know that they constantly have to grow in their faith. PCB, belief in the purest form. So these people know that faith needs an engagement, that it needs interpretation, hermeneutics, that religious truths are always mediated through symbols, rituals, scriptures, and other forms. They can balance faith and reason. They can also reflect critically, so it's post-critical belief. They can reflect critically on faith interpretations, also taking into account the insights coming from science. And the motto of these people could be deep roots. They have a deep faith, at the same time, open hearts. So they remain firm in their faith, while at the same time are also open to be enriched by the dialogue with others. Now, if you look into the data for this, then we get the following result. Okay, so let's have a look. In the first place, you see on the right side in red, these are data for school staff and school leadership. And then you can see the amount of percentages of people in your schools that are in this pure PCB perspective. And for your staff, that's 31%. And for your school leadership, that's really an incredible high number, 48%, almost 1 in 2 of your school leadership is in that pure PCB quadrant. If you look to the profile of these people, you see immediately, Jan will help me, that post-critical belief is higher than relativism. That's even more the case with the school leadership. Have a look. That recontextualization is higher, much higher than reconfessionalization, and that the normative perspective is in the Victoria scale on the Catholic dialogue school, with at the background also some tendencies towards a colorful school, referring to that openness for diversity. So that's in fact the very good news that you have an almost majority support for this trend in your school leadership. You can also see central office staff follows the teachers. That's around 30 to 34%. So 1 in 3 of your teaching staff is in post-critical belief. If you look in the same way to the students, we have another story. So the students at the top in primary school and at the bottom in secondary school. And then we see that only 4% of primary school students have a post-critical belief, and that in fact at the end of secondary school we only see 3.3% on post-critical belief. So the point we make here is that it is very difficult for young people, for teenagers to be post-critical in Australia, given on the one hand a very brutal relativistic cultural context, and on the other hand a strong push from literal belief, as you will see later on. So these students have indeed a high post-critical belief, and they have an almost negative literal belief. They prefer recontextualization, and they like also the Catholic dialogue school. So that's a trend that is present, but it's very small. I think that's the biggest challenge in the data we see for the moment. Jan had an example, I think, also of such post-critical belief.
We made an AI image with each of the tendencies. Can you say something about that, Professor?
Yes, though you can see here the IE image for post-critical belief. So the cross is clearly in the middle. It's firmly rooted in faiths. You see around it a lot of saints, which refers, and symbols also, which refers to the mediated character of the Catholic faith. You see the open windows in glass referring to the openness to the world. You see the coming in of the light, which of course refers also to the pneumatological dimension of our faith. And you see people encountering each other, people in dialogue in that religious room. That's how AI understood and presented the post-critical belief.
On the slide are also some examples of a tendency 1 post-critical belief, like a student who engages enthusiastically when learning about Buddhism, noting with interest how Buddhist compassion relates to Christian mercy, while also noticing the differences, seeing the encounter as enriching rather than threatening their own faith. Or RE teachers who invite students to explore concepts like suffering through contemporary issues, inviting diverse voices whilst exploring the Catholic view on the issue. Okay, now for each of these tendencies we come up with a couple of recommendations from an ECSI perspective. So if you are a school leader and you want to give direction to, you want to manage your school, the people in your school, what can you do with regard to Tendency 1 people? Well, actively engage the staff and students as role models in recontextualizing Catholic identity. Leverage their mature post-critical faith stance to enhance the school's Catholic dialogue identity. Create structured opportunities for them to share their faith journeys and mentor others in hermeneutical approaches to scripture, tradition, and religious practices. Make sure to give them a platform to demonstrate how faith can be both deeply Catholic and openly dialogical. It will be wise to invite them to leadership roles, strategic planning, and curriculum development. Also, liturgical planning, the school prayer culture, they can help bridge traditional Catholic identity with contemporary culture in meaningful ways. Post-critical belief people, they deserve that their ongoing theological formation is supported by their leaders. Partner them strategically with other staff and students from other tendency groups. It's this relationship, the natural conversation, the working together, the collaboration that is often the best way to transmit faith across people. Please do not overwhelm them with responsibilities and address systemic factors that prevent PCB development, like rigid curricula, authoritative structures, lack of contemplative opportunities, work or study-related stress, etc. Professor, you have something to add to this list of recommendations?
I think that in general, of course, this has always been the PCB perspective, and the question always is, how many people do you have in the school that make that possible? As long as you have a high PCB group, you can really create a Catholic dialogue school. If that group gets under pressure, yeah, you are missing the starting point for a Catholic dialogue school, which is clearly not the case, even if at the other hand, we will say also that only 1 in 3 of your teachers at this moment is at this position, which is at the same time also a challenge.
Okay, let's move to the second tendency, guarded openness.
Yes. Guarded openness is a new term. So you see them on the PCB scale crossing the line with literal belief. These are people that are very loyal to the Catholic faith tradition. They are open for dialogue, but dialogue is charismatic. It's an opportunity to announce the good news of the gospel. They strongly identify with the Catholic tradition in content and form, and they combine elements of literal and symbolic belief. So they are not so much searching like Tendency 1 is doing. They don't like too much questions. They do not see really faith as something on the way, and they are not very comfortable when they are put into critical questions or intentions. And if they are challenged, they often withdraw into the literist foundations because they see them as safe and reliable. So you could say that's an inclusivistic position, means everyone is welcome, diversity is embraced, but the Catholic faith or the Catholic truth is universal. Christ is inclusivistically at work in all people, and what the school has to do is to make what is implicit, Christ at work implicitly, to make that through catechesis explicit. So they are open, but it's a controlled openness. Yeah? And it's close to literal belief. These people will prefer in religious education monocorrelation, meaning starting with open for experiences, but always leading people to that one Christian or Catholic point of view. Okay, so it means they are hospital. It's an invitational context, but it's not really fully reciprocal. Others are seen as potential recipients of the Catholic truth, not as genuine partners in dialogue. So if they appear in school, they are often enthusiastic, they are dedicated, they really want to create a welcoming environment, and the whole idea is referring to the Gospel of John. Come and see, come in our school and see what it is to be a Catholic or to live a Catholic life. At the same time, they have clear boundaries that they will defend at the moment that they are questioned or criticized. So they like inner Christian diversity somehow, but are much more hesitant when they have to welcome people of really radically other perspectives that diverge from their own perspective. So they exhibit a faith stance that sometimes is humble and open, but at other moments is very assertive in establishing the Catholic position. So they are open, but it's a guarded openness. Now, if we look to some examples, Jan perhaps can take that slide.
Yes, a teacher in the guarded openness tendency enthusiastically participates in interfaith dialogue, but privately expresses concerns about some confused younger students, preferring they establish solid Catholic foundations first. All parents welcome the school's openness to diversity, but request their child to be excused from competitive religious lessons, wanted to discuss it at home first. Or school leaders who advocate for dialogue initiatives will simultaneously strengthening traditional devotional practices. They prefer to seek balance between openness and anchoring.
The image you see here, created by AI, based on these characteristics. So the doors of the church are open. Yeah? The people look outside, the light comes in, but the people stay in the church. They will not cross the line towards the world. It's open, but it's still safe in the building and in the reality of church life, as this AI image expresses. If you look now to how representative this tendency is in these 280 schools, we start again with school staff and school leadership, tendency number 2. And you see that it's not a very strong representation, but 11% of the school staff and 9% of the school leadership is in this position. If you look to their profile, it's another profile. You see here that there is post-critical belief, but it is accompanied with a high literal belief. That's the same for school staff and for school leadership. These people also want to recontextualize the Catholic faith, but it goes together with values education and reconfessionalization for sure. If you look in the Victoria data, these people are dialogue, but monologue is not much rejected, and the colorful is not very strong, and that's a pattern that you recognize as the charismatic dialogue school at work. So that's a very consistent pattern here, but only, let us say, 10% of people, adults in Catholic schools in Australia are having this guarded openness. If you look to the students for the same pattern, we see almost the same amount, a little bit more in primary school students, almost 13% of them are in this pattern, and it drops down to 9% in secondary school. So in general, you could say 10% is there. You see also the central office staff, 8%, and parents, 14%. That's the highest, which is not surprising. Parents like a guarded openness for their children in this tendency. So that's tendency number 2.
Some recommendations what you can do from an ECSI perspective with guarded openness people. Well, affirm, of course, their religious knowledge and their faith commitment, while gently encouraging them for deeper theological reflection and formation. Guide them in developing more nuanced approaches to religious truth claims. and provide opportunities for guided hermeneutical interpretation of scripture and tradition. Hermeneutics is key, the science and art of discovering and making meaning of things. Invite exploration of negative theology to balance their all too positive certainties. Show how releasing the need for certainty paradoxically deepens our God relationship. Create safe spaces for questioning and uncertainty within a faith framework, and model intellectual humility by sharing their own questions and unresolved tensions. Then please support a transition from a charismatic to a more authentic interfaith dialogue, from defending faith positions to shared exploration of meaning, from maintaining convictions to genuinely listening. So there is a real relationship building. Ask them to understand rather than refute, and expose them gradually to meaningful dialogue with other faith perspectives, and gently provoke their position when doing so. And partner them strategically with Tendency 1, post-critical belief individuals, through collaborative work and all kinds of peer collaboration, where they observe post-critical approaches organically through trusted relationships.
Okay. So you can really work very well with these people, and if you take them together, look, for example, to the school leadership, 9%. In Tendency First, we have 48%. That makes 57%, or in PCB and guarded openness together. That's, in fact, a fantastic starting point to build Catholic school identity, of which, as you know already, we here in Europe are very jealous to start like that. Of course, we have also tendency number 3, which are the literal believers. Also, that's something that is already known to you, but now you can see they are higher up. These are people really with, let's say, a pure literal belief that wants to reconfessionalize the school to make of it monologue schools. Also, this tendency exists among traditionalist Catholics that see schools as for Catholics only, that favor literal readings of doctrine and scripture. They resist, in fact, other worldviews because they find security, certainty in established Catholic rituals, devotional practices, and hierarchical authority or authority structures. And so they believe that these needs to be preserved in an unchanged way. This position often emerges from formation where questioning was disencouraged and authority is seen as absolutes. The result is that faith, in fact, appears confident, but it lacks, in fact, the tools to wrestle with questions and doubt. These people also don't like data, because data shows that their position, in fact, is a very minority position, also in the Australian context. So they try to maintain that God's religious truths can be accessed not through hermeneutics, not through mediations, but directly, literally through a proper sacramental practice and adherence to church teachings, which do not need a contextualization, an interpretation. So they are very confident in their faith stance, even if often they show a lack of theological depth, not much critical self-reflection. They avoid the deeper questions that might challenge these established beliefs. So they resist hermeneutical approaches or dialogue with other perspectives, seeing them only as a threat, not an opportunity, but as a threat to Catholic identity. So we know, of course, all these kinds of people in our own context. They are indeed a minority, but as you know, they are very vocal. So you see here an image which is very clear and blunt. So the cross, as big as possible, to express the Catholic faith with nothing in competition than except this perspective on truth. And Jan has some examples of this.
Sometimes parents can express concern when their child learns about biblical literary genres. not from closed-mindedness, but from treasuring continuity of faith, worried that emphasizing interpretation might undermine their children's confidence in Scripture. Or a student sincerely questions, why are E-class studies other religions when we already know the truth, believing that helping his Hindu friend find Jesus demonstrates genuine care for his eternal well-being. Teacher structures RE lessons around memorizing prayers, learning catechism answers, and understanding clear moral rules, believing that children need certainty and foundation before exploring any questions. So here are some examples on the slide. We can show this in the data we have collected.
Yes, number 3. First with staff and leadership, and you can see consistently 5% of your staff and leadership is in this position, which is clearly a minority position to be clearly differentiated from guarded openness. You see here the pattern is really different. These people have go through the line, clearly through the line of literal belief, very strong literal belief. These people prefer reconfessionalization over recontextualization, and they prefer the monologue school over dialogue school. Have a look. Very clear, explicit patterns consistently on the 3 scales in both groups, but only 5% of adults and the central office staff, we see 7%. Have a look. Parents, 14% are in this position. Of course, parents have often not have kind of theological training before sending their children to Catholic schools. If you look to students, then you can see that this, let's say, very explicit pattern is not also very strong in the children. 7% in primary school, and it stays like that in secondary school students. Have a look again. Very high scores on literal belief, on reconfessionalization, and on the monologue school, but a very small group, which of course could be at the same time very explicit in the way they present their position, as we know.
Some recommendations: always be supportive and encouraging, acknowledge and confirm their strong faith commitment, while gently redirecting rigid or exclusivist expressions toward more inclusive interpretations. Some theological education would not be a bad idea, focusing on historical critical methods of Bible interpretation and an open-minded reading of church documents. Emphasize continuity with tradition while introducing hermeneutical approaches. Many important magisterial documents, Dei Verbum Nostra Aetate and others, show that interpretation, hermeneutics, is the officially approved way. Invest selectively based on readiness. Not all show equal openness to growth, but you know the people, you will be able to manage them. Frame contemporary approaches as developments of tradition rather than a breach with tradition. The faith tradition itself is a continuous development. We call this recontextualization through time. Then create carefully graduated opportunities for genuine dialogue. You begin with intra-Catholic diversity, and you can open it up to other diversity along the way. Create safe spaces for exposure to dialogue with different viewpoints. Invite liturgical leadership while introducing more interpretative and contextual elements to traditional devotional practices. Pair them with Tendency 1 liturgy coordinators who model how traditional forms can incorporate interpretative depth. And always acknowledge that their concerns often arise from legitimate anxieties about dilution and of identity. Listen to what lies beneath their positions before responding.
So what is new with these tendencies now is that we distinguish tendency 2 and 3 from each other. So that's something new. It avoids that we just put everyone with literal belief in just one box. Now you see that there is more nuance if you can distinguish tendency 2 from tendency 3. Not all people in literal belief or at the top. Many of them have an openness, even if it is a guarded openness. And you see also in the diagram, that's not an accident, that the 1 and the 2 tendency overlap, fortunately. So there is also a possibility of dialogue between the post-critical believers and those who are in guarded openness. And perhaps the best approach is for tendency number 3 in the first place to invite them into tendency 2. So to create some openness, but to guard the borders so they feel safe in making that movement. Yes, now tendency number 4. So we call this, and there's a lot of discussion about this, and I invite you to reflect with us on this. We have called them the convinced, but the tolerant convinced. And have a good look to the tendency number 4, because that's a brand new thing that we discovered through this exercise. So these people have an overlap between 3 of the 4 tendencies in the PCB scale. So they have literal belief, they have some post-critical belief, but they have also some relativism. So how to imagine these people? These are people, and you know them in your schools, you will immediately recognize this pattern. They are strongly socialized in Catholicism or Christianity, through their families, through their parish communities. They participate in religious activities, but they do that as a matter of course without questioning. It's a kind of cultural evidence. That's why we say at the top, a culturally determined Catholicism or Christian identity. So they feel comfortable with inherited religious identity that provides them, in the first place, a strong sense of belonging. So it's a social thing, more than a theological thing. It's something they are, rather than something they do. So their religious understanding is often, to be honest, surface-like. It has never been exposed to any tension if they arrive in the school or if they come to the school. So that's the first thing we see with them. But at the same time, they combine this literal belief in many aspects of their own faith with a kind of basic tolerance towards religious diversity. That's why they slide also into the quadrant of relativism, that they just accept that de facto exists in the world around them. Yeah? And they, at the same time, are tolerant. They are formally tolerant for diversity. They know it exists. They will not challenge it, but they will also not allow to be challenged by it. And they will therefore spontaneously, they will avoid a deep dialogue that might challenge their established beliefs. So, and that's why you have that green zone. So it's a kind of compartmentalization. There's a high confessional literal belief that is maintained on the one hand, but at the same time they adopt a relativistic or pluralistic coping style on the other hand. So, as an example, I always for myself give that to my students. If you go to Antwerp and you visit the biggest Hasidic community in Europe, they really live in their own cultural bubble with their own dress codes, their own food codes. They do not communicate, but at the same time they are very liberal. They have shops and they accept without any problem the plural and secular context around them. If I take the plane to New York, there are always Hasidic Jews traveling between New York and Brussels. And at some moments they go at the back of the plane and they pray in the direction of Jerusalem. And they come back to their chair, and sometimes I try to dialogue with them. But that makes no sense. So they are not interested in the theological meaning of their own faiths. It's a practice they do. But at the other hand, in the other compartment, they are in fact businessmen traveling in the diamond sector in Antwerp, doing their job in the secular world. So these people combine the two, but do not accept to interact between the two. And so they are very hesitant around hermeneutical or interpretive approaches to scripture and tradition, because that would disturb the cultural evidence of their faith. So their religious participation is consistent, but it operates on a social level, rather than it is a personal conviction or a very sophisticated theological understanding. They don't have it. And their religious understanding often lacks, for that reason, personal depth or critical engagement. So that's that combination, and that explains, while we have in the data, that's a crucial element in this masterclass, that we see in that data that at the same time you can have a high literal belief, and at the same time you can have a positive relativism. And in fact, it's the isolation of that tendency that we saw in the patterns that created the 6 tendencies we are talking about for the first time today. And these people, if you have them in your school, they will be very cooperative. They will accept the Catholic ethos, but at the same time, they are not open for much renewal. They stay in their own conservative bubble of beliefs and practices. It should not be per se Catholic. It could be Muslim or Mennonite or any other, or Islam. So you have that tendency of people that are convinced and at the same time tolerant. Tendency number 4. So we have here an image that tries to explain this. So these people are in the middle. They have their own, it's a straight line to their truths. They are doing that in community. They're not walking alone. They acknowledge that there's a lot of colorfulness, diversity around them. Look to the left and to the right. They accept it. They do not put it in the dark. They do not condemn it. Oh, but it's not their way. They are just tolerant towards it. Let everything exist, but we go our own path of which we are convinced. Tolerant, convinced. Tendency number 4. Jan has some examples of that.
Think of a family that maintains Catholic identity through regular Mass, religious traditions, Catholic school, friendly to Hindu, Muslim, and non-religious neighbors, but their openness remains surface level. They think with themselves, everyone is entitled to their own beliefs, although we are relieved to be Catholic. Marco attends every school Mass without complaint, sits respectfully beside his Baptist classmate, yet never wonders whether his inherited certainty that only Catholics have the full truth deserves examination. Sophia amicably shares lunch with her other believing and non-believing non-Catholic classmates, yet privately holds, without much question or guilt, that their souls are destined for hell, a belief inherited unexamined from the Eastern Catholic family. So this combination is self-evident without further thought. There's some data that shows this.
Yes, we have some data about this 4 tendency. Let's first have a look to the adults, school staff, 15%. That's considerable, 15% of people that you could say survive also in that way, because it's a surviving strategy, with that tolerant, convinced. And 10% of school leadership is in that position. Have a look, 20% of the adults, 14% of central office staff is to be found here. If we look, however, to the students, and that's one of the big surprises of this master's class, that we see that this tendency among students is considerably present. Next slide. Okay, have a look. We were really surprised by this discovery. 45% of children in these 280 schools, so that's not a small sample, is in that is in that position, and have a look, even 34% of students in secondary school are in this position. And have a look to the pattern. That's very interesting to see. For example, in primary school, you see here how surprisingly they have an almost absolute positive score on post-critical belief, on relativism, and on literal belief. So they combine the three with each other. We see this also, if you look into the Melbourne scale, you see recontextualization is not so high here on the normative level because that asks too much hermeneutics. They prefer values and reconfessionalization. And they like, in the Victoria scale, they like dialogue, but you see on the normative level it goes down. And both the monological and the colorful, the three are positive in the same combination. And in primary school, that's almost 1 in 2 children. So in my reading, it's a kind of survival strategy also for many of these children. Namely, on the one hand, they have an, I would not say imposed, but a socialized faiths. It could be Christian, Catholic, but also otherwise. On the other hand, these children are raised up in the world of TikTok and AI, and they have a lot of diversity, and they have found a kind of position that combines literal belief with relativism. And they are convinced, but at the same time, they have learned to be tolerant. The weak point in this, or the dangerous point in this very strong tendency, have a look even in secondary, is that they have a weak theological development. They are rather avoiding dialogue than want to be enriched by it. That's why if you look to the green tendency, it's dark green in literal belief, but it's light green. There is some post-critical belief, but it's light green. The dominance, the leading principle, the final position is in literal belief. It's therefore tolerant, convinced, rather than convinced tolerant. So that's why we have chosen this terminology here for tendency number 4.
So again, education is the key. Again, we recommend a theological formation. That's the recommendation for all 6 tendencies. Yeah, you should not be surprised. But with a particular attitude, a particular focus that is different from each of the tendencies. Support their transition from an inherited to a personally appropriated faith. Yeah? So ground abstract concepts in lived experience, we would say. When dealing with the tolerant convinced, try to replace unreflective literalism with hermeneutical sophistication. Normalize the questioning and the doubt as dimensions of mature faith. Nurture their personal spirituality by creating opportunities for genuine spiritual experiences. Support their growth from ritual observance to meaningful engagement. Transform their religion from identity marker to a lived divine encounter. And then people will start to change. On the next slide, we have some more ideas. In the middle, cultivate authentic dialogue by moving beyond polite pluralism and surface-level formal tolerance to genuine encounter with difference. Create opportunities for meaningful interfaith engagement. Help them discover the enriching value of engaging with other perspectives. Practice patient accompaniment. Transformation takes time and cannot be forced. Meet them where they are while gently encouraging growth. And engage the parents and the families as essential partners in faith development of their children. The parish members and the parish leaders to which they belong should be part of this transformation process as well. So engage with them together with your school community.
Okay, so we have at this moment a priest from India who is finishing his PhD here at KU Leuven and who has done the ECSI research in India. And what he has discovered is that the Catholic schools in India have really taken this 4 tendency as the normative perspective. Even the bishops have chosen this tendency to show how context is everything. So you have to see India is a very, very pluralistic country from a religious point of view. The Catholic schools are a minority school. So the Catholic schools define themselves as colorful schools, welcoming everyone in a pluralistic mindset. And then they create in this Catholic school a separate bubble for the Catholics that receive separate Catholic education only for the Catholics in the school. So all are welcome. It's a colorful Catholic school that is tolerant for everyone. And in that, they create a convinced or E-class only for the Catholic students that are then initiated in a rather catechetical way in the Catholic faith. Now, that's a model that is very successful there. Catholic schools are very popular in India. The problem is we have done also longitudinal research. If you looked into these Catholics, when they move to the university, which is not a Catholic university, but a secular university, that very easily they lose their faith because they have not been prepared in the Catholic school for dialogue and dialoguing about their faith. So it's that compartmentalization between being in a friendly, pluralistic attitude combined with an unreflected Catholic faith that does not survive if you put them then in a second instance in a university. So that's the, you could say it's a good compromise, but how resilient is it if you really then leave the bubble of your family or the bubble of your tolerant, convinced Catholic school? So that's the danger, I think, of tendency 4, which is for us a new discovery, explaining, to summarize again, that tendency that you can be at the same time a literal believer and a relativist.
Okay, tendency number 5.
The tendency number 5 is what we call mild relativism. So that are people, you can see they are in the green spots. They have still some post-critical belief, but they are on the slippery slope towards relativism. So it's a kind of identity slippage towards secularization. These people, in the first place, their heart is with embracing plurality and diversity. They favor relativistic approaches in dealing with different beliefs. So often they step back from very strong, explicit faith commitments as part of their faith journey. At the same time, they will favor hermeneutical, interpretive approaches of religious texts, rituals, symbols, but at the same time, they will take distance. So they will not accept, in fact, that these mediations are ways to encounter the divine. They are uncertain if God exists. They are more at an agnostic position, if you want. But they are not against faith and religion. They can enjoy a beautiful Easter celebration and the music and the rituals and the aesthetics. They are fascinated by the plurality of religions. They are curious about people who engage into faiths. They are mostly open, warm, friendly towards religious diversity, but they do not make really for themselves a personal option there. So they have some general religious literacy, but there is no much personal conviction, personal engagements. So they can work very well in Catholic school environments, but their engagement is rather superficial. If they recontextualize the Catholic tradition, you should be careful because sometimes they blend so much Catholic elements with contemporary culture, having no deep personal experience of the Catholic faith. That's what comes out is not always authentic, an authentic renewal of the tradition. And also of that, I'm sure you have a lot of examples in your schools. He made this image of it. You can see here it's person-centered. Very strong, the autonomy of the individual is central. As you can see, the person is in the middle. It's his choice. It's her preference. You see a lot of symbols, universalistic, but with little particularity towards a specific, for example, Catholic tradition. You will not see that. You cannot identify this in this picture. They are relativistic, but at the same time mild towards the different believers, and also mild towards the identity of the Catholic school, as long as not too literal. They will embrace, respect, even appreciate mild relativists. Jan has some examples of that.
An RE coordinator designs thoughtful interfaith dialogue programs and can articulate Catholic positions with some sophistication, yet privately admits to colleagues that she hasn't prayed personally in years and isn't sure that she actually believes in God. Or a teacher enthusiastically incorporates mindfulness, indigenous spirituality, and Catholic contemplative practice into retreats, but creating spiritual smorgasbords that participants enjoy, but that lack theological coherence or a distinctively Catholic character. Now you can think of these examples in your own context. We have data that shows this.
So how strong is this tendency in Australia and in these 280 Catholic schools, starting with the adults, school leadership and staff? Have a look. It's only mildly present, I would say. 13% of school leadership and 16% of teaching staff is in this position, number 5. Have a look to these people's, it's again a unique pattern. So we have really discovered 6 unique, distinguishable patterns. This one you see that relativism now overwhelms post-critical belief. Literal belief is negative. These people like to recontextualize using values education, but the resistance against secularization is diminishing. And these people, have a look, they prefer the colorful school over the dialogue school. They do not reject the dialogue school, but it's a very colorful interpretation of the dialogue school. You see that same pattern in school leadership happening, exactly the same, colorful, stronger than dialogue, relativism stronger than PCB, and a diminishing resistance against secularization. You see that school staff, office staff and parents have 11% here in this group, mild relativism. If we look to the students, it even drops down to 8%. So only 8% of your students in primary and then secondary are at this position, having post-critical belief lower than relativism. Again, having values education, and you see a very strong diminishing of resistance against secularization, and a clear option for the colorful school over the dialogue school in this group. Of course, it's not a complete rejection, but you see that tendency 5 has an overlap also with post-critical belief. It's not pure relativism. That's for many Australians unthinkable even, I think. So there is a combination with some post-critical belief in this position, but the heart of these people is at number 5.
So we recommend targeted theological formation that help these people to discover or rediscover Catholic faith from a post-critical perspective. Please provide multiple structured opportunities for self-reflection during dialogue experiences to help deepen their religious engagement beyond surface-level interpretation or mere imitation. Create regular spaces to explore questions about transcendence. Help them to move from more general religious understanding to a more personal faith engagement. You can use them as bridge builders between a more secular and a more believing school community. They're easy to relate to Tendency 6 individuals that can stand in between them and mediate and build bridges, and that could therefore be useful as valuable members of your community or your staff. Invite their contributions to school prayer and ritual life, whilst simultaneously nurturing a deeper theological understanding of those practices. Address their tendency to amalgamate Catholic tradition with contemporary culture, helping them to develop recontextualizations that remain faithful to proper Catholic theology. And perhaps the 5 criteria for recontextualization could be helpful here to distinguish the good and not so good examples. Didier?
Well, so this tendency, we are surprised, to be honest, that it's so low in Australia. So to give you an idea, in Belgium, 90% of the RE teachers, Catholic RE teachers, would be in this position. Yeah. So it's a really different, completely different context. Mild relativism, perhaps a little bit more shift into post-critical belief, but many of them position themselves there. I think it's also a survival strategy in a context which has also much more tendency number 6, as we will explain this now to you. So number 6 is purely secular. It's a combination of people who have a secular agenda, colorful, colorless. And you see that if you look to the blue now, that this tendency is not only external critique, but also relativism, but in its stronger forms, not in its mild forms. So these people tend really to disbelieve. Mostly will not really express radical atheism in a Catholic school context. That's why it crosses also with relativism. But they are not initiated, they are indifferent, or sometimes they are convinced secularists. They have a subjective worldview that is based on individual autonomy. Meaning making is something personal, and they reject any truth claim or authority that comes from an external source. Of course, they may engage with religious rituals. They can appreciate sometimes values or aesthetic expressions, but they will look to it from a humanistic perspective, not with a transcendent lens, and often it's with a kind of implicit attitude of superiority, and they're looking down to all these kinds of superstitionism, superstition that exists in Catholic schools. So they will identify with the values often, but they will show little support or sometimes even resist the religious mission of the school explicitly or implicitly. So they are tolerant as a necessity, but they are not really looking for an encounter with the religious perspective. They have sometimes very strong, sophisticated intellectual criticism of religious belief. They can be sometimes interested in belief as a kind of human construct. They will show tolerance, but as I said, from a position of intellectual superiority often. Their interaction can be valuable. They can test the cultural plausibility of your Catholic school, but they will not really come to an enriching mutual dialogue in which they can learn from the other. In fact, they are just the mirroring of the literal belief that is also not interested in dialogue, but then from the non-religious perspective. And in this sense, they are mutual patterns between literal belief, and what Hutzebot calls literal disbelief. We just have called this blunt secularism. Yeah, the image of Catholic school, that's a teacher's room, has changed in some things. Why not cozy, but in no way any reference to a religious symbol or a Catholic tradition.
There are teachers who participate minimally in religious activities, and they prefer to focus exclusively on curriculum delivery. Privately views the school's Catholic identity as outdated institutional baggage, limiting genuine educational excellence. Or a parent who chooses the school for academic reputation despite its religious character. A school leader empowers his staff to conduct their classes with intellectual rigor and care for the students, yet consistently frames Catholic doctrine as one cultural artifact among many equally valid options, and deflects any student's expression of personal faith with an amiable, "That's a meaningful expression for you." You can see this in the data in remarkable ways.
Okay, so first again, the adults. So you see the school staff, 22%, that's 1 in 5. That's a lot, I would say, for a Catholic school. And 15% of your school leadership, that's also quite a challenge. So you see the diversity in your schools at work. I come back on that later. Your central office staff is very high, 27%. Of course, there are many people there that have no pedagogical responsibilities, but you do an administration job, for example, or just have a secular position there. You see the pattern. External critique is, it's not, have a look, it's even not there really positive. It's relativism, and it pushes down post-critical belief. External critique goes up, but even then you see it's really not crossing the line with the number 4. So that's why you see that we have put it the layer over external critique and relativism. These people likes to recontextualize, okay, but combine it with secularization almost. They clearly are interested in a colorful school. The resistance against a colorless school is not very strong, and they really strongly reject any monological tendency, of course, as secularists. And that same pattern you see also with the school leadership, even a little bit stronger. 15% of your school leaders is secular, and that's something also to take into account. With students, and that's the bad news, I think, of this masterclass. If you look to the students in primary school, 22.6%, but have a look in secondary schools in Australia, 37.9% of the students are choosing for this secular position. That's almost 4 in 10. So that's a lot. You see here that relativism is the only positive pattern, that external critique even becomes stronger than post-critical belief. They have a positive data in the Melbourne scale on secularization. Have a look in secondary school, have a look, it's positive. They strongly reject the monologue school. There is no support for the dialogue school, and there is a positive support for the colorless school in this group. So 37.9%. That's the 6th tendency.
Recommendations. Do not deny that this tendency is present in your Catholic school. Do not ignore these people or give them the impression that they should not exist in a Catholic school, but try to integrate them into the school community as integral members. These are the people given to us to educate, to relate to form. Establish and maintain a serious and mature discourse about religion, though. Even relativist perspectives must engage respectfully with faith traditions. So you have to confront anti-religious discourse if it becomes explicit, while keeping the relationship open. Foster an environment where they can articulate and explore their questions about meaning in a thoughtful way. And you focus on going deeper inquiry. All suppression works counterproductive, so always in a thoughtful way. Focus on the relationship. Again, theological education and formation is relevant. Develop a more sophisticated understanding of Catholic faith beyond simplistic, literal, or purely subjective interpretations. Have them move from observer to a participant stance. Build intentional self-reflection into all dialogue activities. Not what did you learn about Christianity, but what questions about your own life did this raise? So involve them. Make them part of the story and not external observers. Some more ideas. You create opportunities for authentic relationship building with post-critical believers through collaborative projects and activities. Again, there could be bridge builders with the outside secular culture and the community of the school. And they stand in between, and they could perhaps bring valuable contributions to a multi-correlative religious education. And the school could give Tendency 6 people recognition for the importance of criticism of religion where it is justified and necessary. And they bring this criticism also in the process.
Okay, of course the question is also, but that would be another lecture, is this a transition phase for students that later will lead more to, again, a religious stance, or is it a cultural shift that we see happening in Australia? Okay, let's come to the conclusions and the recommendations. So you have now an explanation of the 6 different tendencies. Jan can put some data now together. So this is the general graph that summarizes the 6 positions. Post-critical, deep roots, open hearts. Guarded open is saying, come and see what we believe. The literal believer is saying, stand firm in my truths. The tolerant convinced say, I have my faith and you have your space. The mild relativist walks between worlds. And the secular will say, truth is what you make of it. So we have 6 different scriptural passages, and I had prepared that, but I think there's no time to go into that. 6 different New Testament passages that could be used to explain each of these 6 different tendencies. For example, tendency 2, Jesus at the wedding in Cana, where he performs for the inner group a miracle. The literal believers are like the disciples in the storm, looking for a proof of redemption, so that Jesus is someone who is in control. The rich young man is the one who is invited by Jesus in dialogue to come to a transformation, but finally walks away without being transformed. Nathanael is under the fig tree and is very skeptical, and who says the famous quote, "What can come from Nazareth?" Is what he asks in this story. And an example, of course, of the secular is the doubting Thomas, who asks, in fact, for proof, and unless he can see and touch, he will not believe. Then you see the data, all put together now. The positive news is post-critical belief in your school leadership, 48%. If you combine that with with guarded openness, you have a majority platform for a Catholic dialogue school. And the other tendencies are spreads, but are minimal. If you look to your parents, all tendencies are presented there. It's very diverse. If you look to your students, we have little post-critical belief, very little, as you can see. And there is a remarkable tendency number 4, the tolerant convinced, where you see that children, young people do their best to moderate between the tendencies, in fact. So they are very, very supportive for all the tendencies, and they try to combine them in themselves, but often in the form of compartmentalization. And you see at the end, in secondary school, that what we also saw in India, that at the end, 38% ends in secularization. So we have to reflect on this, on this global picture that we discover here through these 6 tendencies. It would be interesting to do this in a school, to do this in a diocese, and to see how, in different contexts, these different tendencies play the one through the other.
This bar graph summarizes the percentages again in a more visible way. I sorted them from tendency 1 from high to low. School leadership, 48%, significantly more than the central office staff, 34%, and the teachers, 31%. Parents are indeed divided across all 6 tendencies, very diverse. And it's not difficult to be a post-critical believer if you are young in Australia. Some people manage, but they're challenged from various perspectives that surround a bit literal belief and charismatic dialogue, devotional belief. On the other hand, also by secular, relativist, and pluralistic trends. And they're young, so they have little experience with hermeneutical capacities, a lack of durability and persistence. So the importance of good role models in post-critical belief is very important for young people. The next slide summarizes the same data, but sorted according to secular perspectives. And here the secondary students are on top, followed by the central office staff and the number of people who are working in IT, administration, legal things, but not in religious education as such. Students primary, also the teachers and the parents, more than 1 in 5 would find themselves in tendency number 6. Again, this summarizes the results per respondent group. You see the key findings and some reflections on the screen. Post-critical belief is strongly represented in school leadership and also in staff, with 31% the teachers follow. A more or less consistent group of adults profess literal belief. They are a small but often vocal minority that occasionally tend to undermine the dialogue school project. As we said, mild relativism, the 5th tendency, is remarkably small in Australia. And the secular outlook, the 6th tendency, is relatively low at 22% among teachers and 15% among leadership. When we focus our attention on the students, we see quite a different picture. A rather small group shows pure PCB belief. We made comments on that. The largest group of the students are in the 4th model, the tolerant convinced. We extensively commented on that already. They seek a compromise between pedagogically and culturally maintained literal belief and tolerance relative towards those of other faiths. The second largest tendency, however, is the secularization. And a significant minority is found among students who are in fact in the dark blue group. And then finally we have the diocesan office staff and the parents. It's encouraging to see that 1/3 of the employees in the offices showcase clear post-critical belief. Yes, yet it's still 1 in 3. So there is a variety of patterns among office staff and leaders, and especially among the parents, you see an almost equal share of all the 6 tendencies. Okay? Let's move on to more general recommendations, some mission-critical actions for Catholic identity. If you look at the whole picture now, so we step back, we look at the 6 tendencies as a whole, what can we find, what can we conclude and recommend?
Okay, so let's start again with a definition of what is now a Catholic dialogue school. So it's a school that maintains a clear Catholic identity and mission, but fosters at the same time a genuine encounter with contemporary plurality. And through that, it seeks to recontextualize its tradition in ways that is both theologically legitimate and culturally plausible. That's a summary of the Catholic dialogue school. We now see that, in fact, 48% of your school staff will provide a stable Catholic identity that is having these 2 characteristics, deeply rooted in faith, culturally relevance, and that 57% represents authentic diversity. So the question is, and the real question is, how this Catholic faith can engage with that diversity to reformulate its credibility. That's in fact the challenge of the whole ECSI endeavor also. And we think that each tendency serves the recontextualization process. So literal believers or people with cautious openness preserve the theological legitimacy. The secular colleagues can test its cultural plausibility, while a lot of people navigate in a creative way in this tension. So the communities, the Catholic school communities, have a legitimate diversity. And that can prevent Catholic school identity or to become fundamentalistic in isolation, or totally in cultural and moral pluralistic assimilation. And I think that each group, as Jan made clear already, also deserve its own approach in the day-to-day management of the school. You cannot have a one-fit-all approach because each group is different and has other needs. So in the next slide, we have summarized what is the strength of the unique gift that each of these tendencies can give. Number one, integrates faith in life. Number two, maintains the traditional continuity of faiths. The literal believers are the guardians of the sacred mystery. The tolerant, convinced, they can relate to majority of families. The mild relativists will be the ones that have an inclusive pedagogy, facilitate the dialogue. And the secularists can contribute to professional excellence and can also connect to secular families, of course, in the schools. So to summarize it in another way, the Catholic Dialogue School is a recontextualizing community. So sometimes the question is asked, are you against or are you in favor of the Catholic Dialogue School? In fact, that's a strong question because your schools are, in fact, already today dialogue schools, laboratories of dialogue that do not withdraw in monological imposition nor embrace a relativistic colorfulness, but it are already, we just gave a name to it, communities where the Catholic tradition remains the organizing principle in engagement with diversity. And in fact, we need accompaniment of people in all these tendencies. And that's a way to be post-critical. So that's why we also at the end are pleading for accompaniment rather than correction. So we should support every school member in its unique faith journey. We have to create safe spaces in which the PCB people could be the leaders and the teachers in that ongoing formation.
So post-critical belief is the key. Appoint and protect your PCB believers. They're the primary human resource for authentic recontextualization. So identify staff who embody PCB belief and strategically position them as formation facilitators, liturgical leaders, mentors, RE coordinators across school communities. Now, this expression makes sure that the right people for the job is doing the job. And protect them from institutional marginalization, from all kinds of pressures, work-life imbalance, burnout, isolating pressure of operating as a minority in the religious community as well as in secular culture. So develop explicit, coherent criteria for leadership selection and succession. The most consequential long-term action available to you is the deliberate recruitment and formation of the next generation of school leaders towards a post-critical belief profile.
Okay, the challenge then, to formulate a challenge. So positive, this 48% of your school leadership, but we also have detected what we call a formation gap. So there's a gap of 17% between your school leadership and your school staff. This indicates really also in the formation a challenge, and you risk to have two different cultures within your Catholic schools or two different tempos in your Catholic schools, a school leadership that is having a quite theologically sophisticated understanding of the Catholic identity, but on the other hand, then your teachers that are struggling with the integration, the realization of this on the operational level. So that's really a challenge, that 17% formation gap that we see. And finally, I would like to say teacher diversity is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to embrace wisely. That's what the Catholic Dialogue School in fact is. It's a cultivation of formation of a journey for each of your staff members. It asks for patience, mutual respect, and in that way, I think the Catholic school realizes its own identity.
There is not one-size-fits-all approach. You need to establish a differentiated faith formation that is sensitive to what the different tendencies have to offer. So not generic professional learning, but a differentiated approach. Because a single formation program cannot simultaneously deepen the faith of tendency 1 or gently provoke the literalism of tendency 2 and 3 and challenge the complacency of tendency 4 and stabilize the drift of tendency 5 and constructively engage with Tendency 6. You feel that you need different approaches to be used in different circumstances. Finally, please put this insight to good use. Use the ECSI data of the 6 tendencies as a governance tool. You are encouraged to embed the ECSI findings, including the 6 tendencies, into your formal strategic planning, your recruitment policy, and your formation program design, and so on. Okay. We can wrap up this masterclass. Michael?
Yes, thank you very much to Professor Pollefeyt and Jan Bouwens. A very rich and actually very provocative presentation of assets and many challenges to work through with some clear pastoral leadership recommendations. Thank you. Unfortunately, we've ran short on time for questions and discussion. I see that there were several very worthwhile questions in the chat. So what I'll propose that we do instead is include some answers to those questions in the message that will come to you all shortly later this week with the follow-up from this masterclass. So thank you to those who have posed those very worthwhile questions in the chat. And with that, we'd like to conclude this Masterclass 5. You can all expect to receive a message within the next 2 days with sharing the video and the slides from this Masterclass, along with an invitation for your feedback. There will also be a link in that message to sign up for the Catholic Dialogue School newsletter if you're not already a subscriber to that newsletter. You can also expect that email will include a link to a website giving you the opportunity to suggest future topics for Masterclass 6, 7, and 8. And it will also give you an opportunity to download a certificate that you can use for your professional development portfolio. Future masterclasses, the next masterclass, number 6, is very likely to take place in November of 2026. Date and time yet to be specified in collaboration with the diocesan offices, but normally you can expect it somewhere in the middle weeks of November. Usually it's on the Wednesday of the week. Again, thank you very much all for participating today, and thank you to our presenters, Professor Didier Pollefeyt, Dr. Jan Bouwens. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone. Cheers.